Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Canadian Electricity Association's Conversation webinar series. My name is Farhan Mirza, and I'm pleased to be your host for today's webinar. The CEA is the voice of the electricity industry in Canada. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that on the land that I'm broadcasting you from today is the land of the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Nishnawbe people. The Algonquin peoples have lived on this land since time immemorial, and I'm grateful to have the opportunity to be present in this territory. I would also like to recognize Canada as the land of the First Peoples, Inuit and Métis. I would like to pay homage to the Indigenous peoples past, present, and future that continue to work, educate, and contribute to the strength of our country. I'd like to recognize that the land is shared through historic treaties, developed through contemporary treaties, and one that continues to be unceded territory. The Conversation series features presentations from CEA's corporate partners, and the series will highlight a variety of Canadian and international solutions to current and future challenges faced by our industry. Working with CEA's corporate partners, these webinars have been developed to be of specific interest to those working in the electric utility space, from generation through to the customer. For a list of upcoming sessions, check out CEA's website at www.electricity.ca. Before we get going, there are a few housekeeping items I'd like to go over. Our session today is scheduled to run from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Questions can be asked, and we would encourage you to do so as they come to mind by typing them into your chat function, the questions function on your screen to your right. They will be asked at the end of the presentation as time permits. And a brief survey will be sent to webinar participants following the session today. We'd very much appreciate your candid feedback and are very interested in hearing about topics you'd like to have included in the series in the future. Please keep an eye out for future webinars and events through CEA's monthly newsletter, Current Affairs. With over 6,000 subscribers, Current Affairs, much like the national newspaper, is the place to go for Canadian industry news as we connect the national value chain from generation through to the customer. If you'd like to receive Current Affairs, you can subscribe to this free publication, again, by visiting CEA's website at electricity.ca. Today on the Conversation series, I'd like to welcome M&P, who will be presenting on cyber risk assessments after an incident, building cyber resilience and defensibility while transitioning to a more secure environment. This webinar will focus on a specific cyber incident similar to the current refinery attacks, what the actions organizations with ICS/OT systems should follow during an incident. More critically, this discussion will focus on actions often overlooked after an initial remediation, namely on ensuring the defensibility of organizations' actions and building in resiliency to protect the organization from future claims. We will also cover aspects of insurance, legal counsel, regulatory reporting, trending attacks of the threat actors, and the uncommon vulnerabilities that M&P has observed with the ICS/OT environments during red team and other physical and electronic assessments. To take us through today's session, I would like to welcome from M&P Christopher Law, Partner, National Cyber Incident Management and Offensive Security Leader. Chris, welcome to the Conversation series, and I will now turn the webinar over to you.
Great, thank you, Farhan, and thank you, everyone. Thank you for the association for allowing us the opportunity to chat with everyone. So a brief introduction of ourselves and our team. So with us, we have myself, Chris Law. I lead the current National Incident Management and Offensive Security Group for M&P. And with that, what that is responsible for is handling all the incident managements for our clients across Canada. And in addition to that, we also perform a number of the typical red teaming, penetration testing, and those sort of forensics works within our group here. With me, I have Andre Sukram. He will be helping me in the background answer your questions. Sam, unfortunately, is not able to join us today because of the fact that there are so many incidents going on right now that he's actually in the field, and more on that later. So prior to myself joining M&P, I was, for the last 5 years, I was the Western Canadian Incident Response Leader for Deloitte Canada. In my experience really is focusing on providing yourself sort of the true insight as to what happens during an incident and after an incident. As you know, we were there handling a lot of the critical infrastructure organizations, transportation and municipality issues that came up in the instance you may have heard of. M&P itself, it is a Canadian-made full-service IR provider. We have investigation forensic labs in Calgary and Toronto. We also have dark web monitoring facilities, as well as insurance advisory. We have also remediation and privacy advisory. And through various partnerships, we can also provide cyber legal counsel. So a quick agenda for today. Obviously, we want to give you a quick primer on what we're seeing for the current cyber threats that are affecting the critical infrastructure organizations. I want to sort of take you through a 10-step plan. What happens after incident? And we want to sort of pivot over to the cyber insurance areas, as well as making sure that we don't forget about the human element. Of course, finally, want to stress the importance of building in the resilience. Yes, we had an incident. We've learned from it, we recovered, but we now need to deal with what happens to our organization after that, meaning not just the 3 weeks or 4 weeks after, but the months and years following. So on that note, how are they attacking us? This is nothing new. We kind of know that obviously with compromised credentials, we're used to seeing that our weak passwords are a way in, 19% there. Cloud configuration, we all are moving to the cloud, and with that, we sometimes put too much trust in some of the cloud service providers, whether they're large, financial organizations like SAP, or maybe they're ones like AWS, Azure, and Google. We need to know that, yes, they do provide a level of security. However, we also must be cognizant that we must actually look at our own sandbox within the cloud and perform the actual security configurations necessary to protect ourselves from everyone else. Of course, you see phishing there is still a very large percentage of the attacks. And then with our incident or infrastructure organizations, we notice that physical security compromise is, of course, the next up. A note on that, we often see that when we are testing, when we're performing red team exercises against oil and gas, natural resource and electrical companies and hydro, we almost hit a 99% success rate with physical security. So we'll chat about that following. So ransomware is still here. We know that. We hear it every day in the news. You'd be surprised that, okay, is it everyone? Is everyone taking advantage of these organizations? Or is it the teenager in the US or overseas? It's actually what the experts say, that it's actually 6 operations that account for 84% of these attacks. But we'll discuss how that actually happens in the next slide. But more importantly, what we're obviously seeing is not only are they attacking and trying to stifle the organization, but what they're also doing is putting in more malware and more ransomware so that they can continually attack our systems. I'll elaborate on that further. So who, when, and why are they attacking us? As you know, there's obviously a number, thousands of solo threat actors. What they're doing is they're taking advantage of various weaknesses throughout an organization. Of course, they're attacking, the critical infrastructure, all the transportation companies, oil and gas, as I mentioned. But are they actually the ones performing the rest of the attack? The answer is no. What they're doing is they're taking advantage and spreading their wings to see if the entire threat surface that's available. Once they get access to an organization, they keep it, they store it, they say, okay, let's make sure that we have access continually. And then later on, it could be a matter of time where they get on to the dark web and other sites and say, hey, we have access to XYZ organization or XYZ Water Co. or XYZ Electrical Co. And then say, okay, what will you give me in return for that access? And of course, some exchange is made of whatever. And then these more sophisticated groups, the 6 that we mentioned before, are responsible for the majority of the malware and the dealings with the ransomware that you hear about in the news, the extortion and the transactions. And I know that the long weekend is coming up, but unfortunately, that is the worst time. I actually dread long weekends, not because I don't get the time off, but more unfortunately, the fact is that with long weekends, Fridays, check runs, that's when the threat actors threaten us the most. They know our business often better than us. So really, it's important to make sure that we're aware of that. At the same time, we understand that it's the wide area of hackers that contribute their access of your organization to these a smaller group of 6 or so groups, and then that's when they attack at a specific time. Okay. Now you've heard about all the headlines. We've seen it every day. You know, of course, I just put up JPS there. They're all basically sort of focused on perhaps worldwide attacks. In the States, we hear about that the most. But really, the threat is also real here in Canada. Now, where does the threats come from? Of course, the third-party cloud. It may not be us. It may, you know, we may have our entire infrastructure pretty locked down. But unfortunately, as soon as we sign up a partner or a third party that has to have access, whether it's a financial system, whether it's, you know, a third-party provider that, you know, HVAC and the usual things like that, or it could be a nation state. Of course, our critical infrastructure is a primary attack for nation states, so we have to understand that. And then, of course, the typical malicious employee, that does still happen. And of course, as I mentioned, the non-organized hacker, basically just looking for access to anywhere and everywhere, throwing a casting a wide net and seeing what kind of access and vulnerabilities they can take advantage of, and then upsell their access to these more sophisticated groups. Now, going back to what I mentioned, when I mentioned the threat is real here in Canada, what I mean is that JBS, you've heard it in the news, they paid 11 million US. In the month of June, I myself and the team here have been dealing with clients that have already paid nearly 6.5 million in Canada of ransomware. So of course it's not announced, it's all very privileged and confidential, but it's happening everywhere and the amounts are high. Okay. So ransomware payments are declining. Yeah, it might just go in conflict with what I just mentioned, but what we're seeing is that although there's much more ransomware demands, the actual amount that clients are agreeing to pay is falling. Why? Because before, these groups wanted to make sure that, you know, people would pay them, so they would honor and provide either the destruction of the stolen data or return of the stolen data. Now what we're seeing is a lot more are saying, okay, we'll take your money, we'll give you back your data, but at the same time, then we're re-releasing it or selling that data again. And so more and more companies are saying, no, we're not going to pay. We're going to try to recover from backups and use the money to hopefully reconcile with our clients and our affected users, okay? But still, the request for additional ransom demands is rising. So once they take advantage of you the first time, they'll keep on trying to ask for more for the rest of the data. This slide also shows that of course, ransomware payments, we're still agreeing to pay around 33 to 34%. That hasn't changed. But you'll notice here that the 32% where the paid additional ransom demands and eventually got their access, that's increased from the 22 that never got access. So they're trying to say, okay, we will give you access to your data. But what this unfortunately doesn't show is the fact that you'll get access back, but they'll try to take advantage and extort you again in the future. And this is a key part of this seminar, which I want to bring to light with more on that later. So what are we seeing in the field? Andre's team, from their studies, from the red teamings and investigations that they're doing, they're seeing the usual thing, whether it's an IT or OT environment. We're seeing the very same things that had happened, meaning, of course, patch management. We're seeing the network segmentation. Now, we won't get into the whole discussion of whether or not IT and OT networks should be completely segregated. We can go on for hours for that. But you know, that being said, still, it's important to make sure that although I know that organizations are starting to merge the two with hopefully layered security in place, we're still seeing a number of issues around there. Of course, the lack of hardening and building standards with the various devices on each of the networks. But more importantly, as I mentioned before, the physical access. When we are tasked to attack ethically, or oil and gas or some critical infrastructure organization, what do? Yes, we do the digital route, we do the electronic attacks, but 9 times out of 10, our greatest success rate has always been the physical access. It is so easy to social engineer ourselves onto a branch site, onto a mining site, onto a facility, waterworks, So we need to make sure that we pay attention not only to the electronic access through the internet and portals and VPNs, but more importantly, the physical access, making sure that we train our staff to address and approach folks that they don't recognize. So we've been hacked. What do? Of course, stressful. We swear, we jump up and down, we curse. But of course, dealing with this, we always have to make sure we stay calm. You're not alone. You won't be. Everyone else has been, whether they like to admit it or not. So what we want to do is just take you through a quick 10-step plan. Wanted to just focus on the key messaging and provide sort of what we've seen in the field, what we've seen during our engagements, so that you can understand that, okay, there are things, it's not as technical. I want to make sure that we understand all the human elements when you were dealing with an incident. First thing, is everyone present and do they know their roles? Hopefully they do. One thing we want to always stress, it's not just an IT problem. Every single person in the organization, whether it be retail or electrical or water or any kind of oil and gas company, we each have a role, even if it is not doing anything, locking down your laptop, going home and not discussing anything about the incident. Others will have obviously more to do. They would need to make sure that they get organized, they understand what they have to do and feed the information up to the various teams. The key here is making sure that it's not just leaving it to IT. The CEO, everyone else has a role to play, especially in the communication side of things. And one thing I wanted to stress here was make sure to not hesitate to call on vendors, partners, and experts. Sometimes we say, okay, we can solve the problem ourselves. Usually we've seen more often than not, they've done more damage trying to solve the problem themselves when the vendor and the experts come and say, well, we could have done that and it would save you X amount of effort and cycles and so on. So make sure that we understand that we have to call our vendors, our experts, but make sure that we have a plan to do so. And of course, I'll always stress this throughout. We must practice this. We don't want to learn this the first time when we have an incident. Okay. Number 2, have we engaged external counsel? Very important. It sounds pretty obvious when we're dealing with something that can obviously affect the reputation as well as have legal implications later on through various claims from our clients and customers. We need to ensure that we have external counsel. And obviously, many of you know that this is for privilege. With that, you'd be surprised, even the most largest organizations may not understand that. We personally have had to explain to a very large, let's say, governmental agency that has recently been had some issues, saying that yes, you do need a lawyer, and you do need to make sure that we work with them and we report up to them. Now, what does that look like? What does that model? A lot of people ask me what that model looks like, and what it means is that everyone, all the various experts, the teams, the third parties, even their organizations, IT, we can all work together to obviously do the various investigation and tasks surrounding an incident. However, all the conclusions, the summaries, all that has to be filtered up to a single source, usually the incident commander or the incident leader, and that person or persons will have to feed that directly to external counsel so they can vet the information so that they can protect the organization while this is happening. Okay. Of course, the next big question, as we mentioned, is do we have cyber insurance? I'm sure most of the organizations do, but there's a whole lot of aspects behind insurance itself, and it's changing right now. Given the amount of payouts, the amount of ransomware that's being paid, it's having an adverse effect on the cyber insurance market right now. So what are we seeing in terms of coverage and trends? Of course, we have to understand there are various aspects of your insurance policy. If you actually have cyber insurance, you'll notice that you may have some amounts, whatever, millions of dollars, and versus for incident response. What does that cover? It covers legals, it covers forensics, it covers the investigations, the notification, the usual credit monitoring, public relations, all those costs. And then of course you have first party insurance, which is the extortion aspect. That means the payment, the business interruption, all that stuff that is more, shall we say, intangible. How much does it cost to restore that? Of course, a third party, that means everything that has obviously affected our clients, our customers, and of course the class action lawsuits that may come up after an incident for your organization. And then more importantly, a lot of times we see this in the US and it's growing here. We see a lot of the directors and officers of the organization requesting and needing D&O insurance, because they do, as directors and officers, they do have a duty of care to ensure that they secure the data that's entrusted to them. So even if it's outsourced to a third party, they need to be covered, because we're seeing lawsuits directly against them personally, and unfortunately against their houses, their homes, and so on and so forth. So important to know that we make sure that we investigate the options for directors and officers of our company and make sure they have that coverage. So as I mentioned before, we see that coverage is expanding, but we're noticing a huge, obviously, decrease in profitability of the insurer because of the amount of payoffs, right? And so what's happening now, I've just heard that certain times, or even as July 1st, there may be so many changes where if you don't already have cyber insurance, it'll be very, very difficult to get it. Why? Because of the amount of, as I mentioned, ransomware payments. The initial requirements to have that cyber insurance provider added or addendum to your current policy will become very onerous. And more importantly, if you do have cyber insurance already, we need to make sure that we are clearly understanding how we engage and make the claim, the reporting requirements, the fine print. We need to make sure that we understand that, because we have actually in real life experienced that very same issue where they did have cyber insurance. We proceeded as such, saying that, okay, we're going to help, we're going to do all these wonderful things. The organization said, great. The issue was there's a clause in that says you must report the incident to them within 24 hours. They failed to do so before they even called others, experts, and so on. Because of that, the entire claim was null and void. So make sure that we understand the fine print. So other questions we have to ask ourselves in regards to insurance. What's our risk tolerance? What legislation and regulatory controls do we need to understand? Of course, what is our data retention? What are we saving? Are we saving personal information? Are we not? What's the sensitivity? And of course, what is the potential for an incident to put actually human lives? Will we have issues where if systems go down, will human lives be put in danger? We need to make sure that we have adequate coverage for that. And of course, finally, that all filters down into making sure that our insurance program fits. There is a number, there could be a webinar, a complete session of 1 hour in itself, just discussing whether or not you should have cyber insurance and what other organizations. There are a growing number of organizations are not purchasing insurance. They would much rather spend that on improving their overall security posture in other ways. So going back to our step-by-step plan, this is key. Number 4 is establishing communication protocols. As I mentioned, it's important that we know, we obviously have updates. We ensure that we issue directives, and we make sure that we communicate regularly to the various parties. There's a whole protocol behind that, yes. But what I wanted to bring to light is one simple thing. For instance, when I am leading an incident and I say, okay, I need a backup logs of from this time to this time off this server or this system. Sounds simple enough, right? So sure, we can email that, or we can, make that as a task item. Unfortunately, what may happen is your team may just say, okay, the IT team may say, oh, great, okay, fine. And then they add the editorial, they add the comments. They say, okay, well, it looks like, M&P wants our logs. It looks like we won't be able to go home this weekend. We have to stay here all night because, so-and-so, he didn't run the backup, and here we are. Now that was maybe done through email, maybe that was done through a recorded conference bridge. What happens in a situation that could become public record, and that shows negligence. So we need to make sure that as we step through an incident, we need to make sure that we don't add the editorial, we don't add the, the commentary. We just say, that's what you need, here it is. We don't have this because this, the logs were overwritten. That's fine, just leave it at that. We need to make sure that we train our staff and we train everyone to not talk about the incident And if we need to talk about it with third parties or media and all that, it's done through a very established protocol, okay? Of course, if we don't, the damages through litigation can be tremendous. So here I want to do is talk about the specialized teams. Now, as you probably imagine, there's a number of different things you've seen from other organizations say, okay, what do you need to do? You need to have all these wonderful frameworks. You have to do secure, detect, investigate, all that. That's fine. Yes, we know that's what we're supposed to do. But really what I wanted to demonstrate to you or illustrate to you is exactly what kind of teams are actually deployed when we're dealing with a severe or critical incident. Of course, the incident leadership team, it's to educate the board executives on threat actors, what's happening, ramifications of making payment, all that usual stuff, the crown jewels. Liaise with the crisis management if there's BCP issues, counsel and law. So the containment team, it could be a separate team, and their only focus is to gain as much visibility to the entire environment to make sure that we can contain the malware or the issue. We need to aggregate and we need to look through and install agents so that we can have that visibility so we can contain the situation. Is the malware still running rampant? Are we still having external threat actors being able to access our environment at will? We have a team that's focusing on that to make sure that we don't see any new indicators of compromise. Of course, then we have the malware team. It could be a separate team, and what they do is simply focus on the malware itself. Hopefully, usually in most cases, we have a copy of it. We know what it's doing. We focus on analyzing that and making sure that we understand exactly what it does, what it says it does. We can't rely on third parties or the internet to say, oh, we have this type of virus, right? We expect this. We need to make sure that's the variant that we have. More importantly, we have the root cause team. This is very important to ensure that we understand exactly what the threat actor did, how they got in there, what they collected, and ensure that we keep that data and follow the chain of custody, because we may need that for future legal engagements, okay? Of course, data exfil, the forensics team. Has data been stolen? Have they removed or copied sensitive data? We need to understand how much as best we can to make sure that we can defend. As I mentioned, this entire seminar is focused on defending ourselves against the future potential litigation and reputational issues, okay? And of course, the documentation team. We got to remember we document all our actions, our decision points. There's also a seventh team, that is IT. And what are they responsible for? Well, they have to remediate and bring back all the systems back online. So we can't forget about them. One thing we've learned is making sure that we are deliberate with our actions. In the heat of the moment, everybody's racing around doing whatever they can, and it's stressful. And we're trying to do the best and bring back all the systems as quickly as possible. Quite often, when we have to decide on a specific, action to do, for instance, the threat actor is still in our environment, we don't know what to do. You know what? We are going to have to shut down the internet throughout our entire organization. So unfortunately, sometimes that decision is so big that we spend days deliberating. Oh, it's going to take this system down. It's going to take that system down. Well, we can't do that. And so we need to make sure that we have a very, key and very succinct decision-making process. So then we say, yes, we need to cut this down. We are being breached, so we're going to turn it off. So turn it off now. Well, that's fine. Now we made that decision. Unfortunately, we sometimes forget with a very large organization, we may have different access, different internet access points. So we must validate that we've actually turned it off, because we've unfortunately spent another week or so saying, what's still happening? Why are they still? Oh, that facility way out in the middle of nowhere, they had that one ISP that is sort of a custom ISP, and they bring in the internet that way. We forgot to shut that down. We need to validate our actions, okay? Keep it simple. Makes sense. Seems pretty obvious, but especially when we were dealing with oil and gas incident, many facilities throughout the province, and said, okay, what's the best way to collect that data? So part of the network was down, so the team was thinking of all these wondrous ways to bring up a new cloud and then copy the information up that way and things like that. And then it's like, okay, well, how long is that going to take? And it's going to take days. So really, what was the best way? get someone to drive. I know it sounds onerous, it sounds huge. Yes, the person was on the road 18 hours a day, unfortunately, but we basically deployed a number of drivers to go and collect the hard drives from each and every site and drive them back to the corporate office. It's, let's not overthink this, right? Let's not try to create a bigger problem. Let's just keep it simple. Let's just drive over there, pick up the data and come back. At the same time, in a more, perhaps another illustration is the fact that we can just look at, going down to London Drugs or somewhere to buy a hard drive, copy the data, rather than try to spin up a new VM to store the logs that we need to analyze, okay? Number 8, document, record, organize, store, archive, and document, rinse and repeat. Very important. As I mentioned, sometimes in certain situations, this may become a matter of record. So we need to make sure that we thoroughly document and organize our information, what we've done, why we've done it. And number 9, this is a very key. I've noticed this over the years, especially after doing numerous incidents. It's a growing concern. Ransomware and all these type of incidents, they're happening every day. It's taking a toll on the organization. People are stressed, right? So unfortunately, it's part of business. We know that it's going to happen, and we may be still dealing with an incident that happened 2 years ago. It is what it is, right? So we need to make sure that we understand that it's a marathon, not a sprint. So we need to make sure that we take care of our people. So just to illustrate this further, people just think, okay, we had an incident, it lasts the weekend, or it's a really stressful week or two. That's true for the initial portion, but quite often, a number of our incidents, over 100 of them, we're still dealing with the business recovery phase, as you can see there. It could last months, if not years, right? And so we just need to make sure that everyone is understanding of that. So we'll pivot over just to the human element, as I mentioned. Everybody wants to help out. Stress is real. We don't want everyone to be a hero, right? As we get, as we have an issue, we stay up, 18, 20 hours thinking, okay, we got to make this work. We've obviously seen a lot of poor decisions, mistakes by critical key resources. And so the person, the Unix administrator or whoever, they need their rests. He or she force them to take the break, get the second shift in, or just say, look, you've done your best, thank you, get some rest, it's better. Trust me, it's not, timing is everything, yes, but really, when you offset it by potential mistakes or overwriting of logs, it's not worth the risk. Make sure that they get their rest. Another thing is we often ignore the root cause. Sometimes and often we know who caused the issue. Maybe the person clicked on something. And of course we race around doing all to solve the problem, but we forget about the poor person who clicked on that. He or she may feel very guilty. And we've seen a lot of unfortunate situations where they quit, they resign, they have issues, they sue, they seek legal action against the company because they felt ostracized. We need to make sure that we have a plan to protect and support the person. We're all human, we all make mistakes, okay? So growing concern for the mental stress, as I mentioned. The executives, the leadership should not always focus on the clients and public. They know that they have to deal with the clients. It's part of business. And of course, getting the right message out to the public. But we need to, some of the better the better incidents that we've done is that where the executive management focuses on the employees and says, we're all in this together. We are here to support you, not to forget the team, the staff themselves, okay? This is one that I want to stress too, especially with the group of, the association here. When we have an incident, your competitor or your industry colleagues, they are a huge source of support, resources, wealth of information. Why? More than likely, you all have similar systems. You all can help. When we're doing a number of, say, a very critical transportation company, a competitor transportation company offered, carryover services, all that other services, because they know that during an incident, it could happen to them. And they would like, professional courtesy to be extended. So don't forget about your competitors. They will come running and help. I've seen that happen And it's, it's surprising, but at the same time, they know that when stuff happens, they may be next. So as a cooperative, cohesive body, such as CEA, we need to understand, maybe we should set up, protocols where we can, share information securely, and of course, under legal privilege and under guidance of counsel, we need to do that to help facilitate dealing with prolonged or a very sophisticated attack that affects us all, okay? Again, also making sure that we don't keep the regulatory and privacy organizations at bay. We don't ignore them. We spend the time now, we'll call it peacetime, to make sure that we take care of them, understand that, set expectations, and be very supportive and build that trust so that when something does happen, they understand who they're dealing with, okay? So, number 10, finally, understand that unfortunately dealing with incidents, it's part of normal business operations. So what do we need to do to make sure that we build resiliency and defensibility? Okay, this is a typical slide. You've seen this from all sorts of consulting organizations. It has different variations: identify, protect, respond, recover, protect your crown jewels. That's great. I mean, yes, this is true. We must do this. I'm sure all of us have already done this to some degree. And then we also have to build in the risk. Do we manage the risk profiles, understand the residual risks? Okay, yes, we'll do that. That's all great. But what I really want to get to is what really saves the organization or destroys us. People ask me all the time, what's the one or two things we can do, Chris? Number one, backups. Sounds simple enough. It's the most boring IT operation ever. We understand that, but making sure that we back up not everything, but our critical data, understanding what that critical data is, right? Testing our backups, probably the second most boring thing ever in IT. And then making sure that they're clean. And of course, having offline copies. So many times that our backup systems where you back them up to the cloud, that gets encrypted or something. So got to make sure that we understand, how we can back that up, making sure that we have a good backup process in place. Logs, again, very boring. There's lots of them. We sometimes rush to bring up a system and we don't look at what kind of logs it's giving out. We need to make sure that we optimize and validate. Why? Because the logs are the number one thing that we go to when there's an incident. We need to look at what the threat actor has done, where they have traveled to, right? And if you don't have proper logs, or the logs get overwritten for some reason because we didn't set it up initially properly, and it gets overwritten in a day versus 3 weeks, then we have issues. And then of course all the other things, which is monitoring, practicing our incident preparedness. We do a lot of tabletop exercises, we do a lot of drills and things, but unfortunately we tend to find that most companies do more fire drills and business or building evacuation drills than cyber drills. Yet cyber incidents are going to be much more frequent than your office burning down. Of course, keeping things offline. Even the biggest companies we've seen, they think that, okay, we'll keep all our critical stuff on various places throughout. What if it all is offline? What if it's not accessible? No one thought about copying it to a safe or copying it to a USB and putting it in a safe, unfortunately. And then finally, staff training. Your front line, it is making sure that your staff can add to that layer of security, okay? So finally, this is what I wanted to stress the most, and that is we've talked all about the incident itself, and we talked about how, all the steps we have to take for an incident and dealing with an incident. But what we're seeing now the incident is over, is it really over? We need to make sure that we protect our organization against the incident, meaning that we need to almost record and archive everything that we did with that incident. Why? Because once we know, or a threat actor or any of the customers, what we're seeing is a trend where a customer says, oh, I know this electrical company has been breached, so I'm going to put some information. I'm going to scan my bill, my electrical bill, and just put it up on the dark web or our marketplace site and say, hey, my information's out there. I'm going to sue you because you had a breach and my personal information is out there. It's a false claim. We're seeing a ton of those happening right now. And if we're not prepared to say, no, that's not true. Why? Because we know our incident only covered, these level of customers or this bunch of customers, and you're not in that bunch. We can validate this. So therefore your claim is false. But if we don't, remember the incident, if we don't archive the information that we have, then we can't, it makes our defense of that claim much more difficult, okay? And of course, we need to make sure that we don't just forget about the incident itself. We know that, our information still might be out there, so we need to continually monitor so that when it does pop up for some reason, we need to be ready for that. Say, okay, 2 years from now, as I mentioned before, some of these ransomware or these threat actors, they either returned or supposedly returned or destroyed the information that they stole from you. But then they may have sold it to someone else, and then 2 months or 2 years later, they come back and say, hey, we're going to re-release it. And you're like, okay, it'd be nice to make sure that you're always monitoring for that. And then of course, making sure that we continually demonstrate how we've improved our organization and our environment to the various regulatory and privacy organizations. Okay, on that note, I think we have just about 4 minutes left, 5 minutes left. So wanted to thank the CEA for allowing us this opportunity to quickly give you sort of a crash course, what happens after an incident and building some defensibility tactics. And just wanted to know, I guess from there, we'll go over to questions and answers, Q&A.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Chris, for that great overview and insight on cybersecurity. So I'd like to request the audience to type in any questions that you might have for Chris, and I believe Andre's on the call as well, so you can jump in and answer any questions. To start off the discussion, perhaps, Chris, I can ask you a couple of questions. Firstly, maybe talk about cyber insurance. Is it worth it? Premiums are rising along with the requirements. Would the funds, better be spent elsewhere?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're definitely seeing that because, as I mentioned, it's becoming more and more difficult to get cyber insurance, and obviously, the inherent cost is going up. So what I would suggest is working with your insurance provider, say, okay, we would like coverage in certain areas. Maybe you just need coverage in ransomware payments. You can get insurance specifically for that third party or something, and then focus the first party and or incident response money or funds that would go to that premium or rider to, your own efforts. At the same time, it's always important that if you do have cyber insurance, sit down with your incident responder, your legal counsel, and the insurer to say, okay, what happens if we have an incident? What do you expect? And make sure that it's clear so that you don't sort of default on a potential claim. And then also another tip is to make sure that you can work out how good you are. I mean, what level of maturity you are, so that you are a safer bet. So they can say, okay, we're not going to raise your rates. We're going to basically say that, yes, you've done all this work in securing your environment. We'll keep your rates the same. So,
yeah.
Okay.
Excellent, thank you. Next, want to ask, many of our fellow colleagues in the industry use similar systems and processes to what you described. So how can we really protect ourselves against a coordinated attack? We obviously cannot change our critical infrastructure overnight. So how do we deal with reports that large percentages of our organizations are vulnerable to the same threats?
Yeah, I think using the CEA as a vehicle for this, given all the various members, and I know they're taking a quick look, there might be a lot of complementary systems. So I think with, I'm not trying to put CEA on the spot, but I see a lot of organizations banding together and say, hey, we all have our Honeywell, we all have our Siemens, infrastructure. Let's approach Siemens as a group and say, hey, we're really worried about, what's going to happen if this happens, right? So can you come out and provide all of us that have your same system what we can do to prepare ourselves and work together as a group, a common unified voice to help drive that kind of response from the various critical ICS type systems.
Excellent. That makes total sense. Again, I'll ask the audience if you have any questions, ask them through through the questions panel. While we're waiting for more questions to come in, Chris, is there anything else perhaps you'd like to touch on, or Andre, if you'd like to chime in as well on anything that you went over, or any thoughts that you'd like to leave the audience with today?
I guess the one major thing is making sure that we practice. We don't wait for the incident to happen. It could happen this weekend. Touch wood, it won't. But it's the simplest thing. It's not something very sophisticated. It could just be anyone in your entire organization that clicks on one email, and then you won't know it. It might, and then 3 months later, crap hits the fan, right? So remember, it's always making sure that we have that plan together. And the worst time to develop that plan is when you actually, oh no, we have an incident, everything's encrypted. So taking the time, it's something that everyone is doing, and so you don't want to be left behind. And of course, second is, I can't stress enough, the usual logs and backups, but the first line of defense, people always ask me, what's the cheapest way? What's the most cost-effective way to defend myself and my organization? Is get your staff trained through online courses, what have you, classroom sessions. Force them to understand the technologies and what to do when they do something wrong. People will make mistakes, and so don't just ignore it or delete the email. You clicked on it, great. You deleted it, great. Okay, now go tell IT that here's what I did. It's okay. It's a mistake, and it's better. The organization is better off for it.
Yeah, that's great advice. Yeah, always being prepared, and these attacks are getting more and more unique and creative, and harder to detect for laymen. So it's good advice for sure. So yeah, with that, I think we can conclude the webinar. I don't see any more questions, so I'd like to thank you, Chris, for taking the time to present, and MNP for partnering with us on this session. Before we let everybody go today, I'd like to request that you guys mark your calendars for our next webinars on July 8th. Plug and Drive will be joining us to showcase their online tool, Find Your EV Match, and how to help your customers understand the total cost of ownership. And after a brief summer break, we'll return to the conversation series on August 19th with Nisus Corporation, who's going to talk about copper naphthenate and how the leading replacement for chemicals improves ESG and sustainability. All of CA's future events and webinars can be found in our monthly newsletter on current affairs, or you can go to the news and events section on our website again at electricity.ca. In closing, again, I'd like to thank MNP and Chris for joining us, and each of you for taking the time to attend the webinar. With that, we will conclude. Thank everybody for joining us, and stay safe. See you next time. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.